In the winter of 1891, the Missouri Ozarks were a lonely stretch of hills, forests, and muddy wagon paths. Travelers, weary from the bitter wind, often searched desperately for shelter. Nestled in a grove of bare oaks stood a modest boarding house with smoke curling from its chimney. Inside, warmth beckoned, and the scent of stew drew strangers like moths to a flame. The boarding house belonged to two sisters, Clara and Josephine Whitlock. The women lived quietly, keeping mostly to themselves, yet word of their cooking traveled far and wide. Wagoners spoke of the broth that tasted richer than any meat stew. Loggers claimed it restored their strength, and drifters swore it had a flavor unlike anything else on earth. Guests came and went, never questioning the recipe. The Whitlock sisters welcomed all with soft smiles and bowls of steaming food. Yet behind that inviting door, whispers swirled in hushed tones, whispers that the stew contained something more than venison or rabbit. And though nobody dared ask, a peculiar chill always followed the last bite. Clara Whitlock, the elder at 32, carried herself with stern authority. She had the sharp eyes of someone who had endured too much and trusted too little. Her hands were always busy, kneading bread, stirring pots, or patching warm blankets. To the weary traveler, she was the image of practicality, a woman who could survive any storm. Josephine, at 27, was her opposite. Where Clara's expression was hard, Josephine's was soft. Her gentle manner soothed guests. Her smile made them feel welcome, and her voice, calm as a lullaby, offered comfort after harsh journeys. Many remarked that she seemed too kind, too tender for the rough Ozark life. But tragedy bound them together. Years before, a fire had claimed their parents, leaving the girls destitute and alone. The land was unforgiving, and so were the winters. Clara hardened herself against the cruelty of hunger, while Josephine clung to compassion, torn between her conscience and survival. The secret they shared was not one of choice, but of circumstance, one dark decision that had spiraled into something unspeakable. The Whitlock stew quickly became a legend. Thick and savory, it warmed frozen bones and filled aching stomachs. "It's got a richness," one traveler said, smacking his lips, "like no meat I've ever known." Another swore he dreamed about it for weeks after leaving. On stormy nights, the boarding house bustled with laughter, clinking spoons, and the crackle of firewood. Clara's stern watchfulness kept the place in order, while Josephine ladled stew with a smile that eased the traveler's weariness. For a few silver coins, strangers were fed and sheltered, and in the Ozarks, that was a blessing few questioned. Yet Ezra Pike, a logger with a keen tongue, muttered one night that the flavor was too close to home. The other men laughed him off, claiming he'd had too much whiskey. Still, his words unsettled Josephine, who glanced nervously at her sister. Clara silenced her with a look. For every praise of the stew, a shadow seemed to grow longer across the sisters' table. By spring, rumors whispered through the valley. A traveling salesman vanished after leaving town. A farmhand was never seen again after stopping at the Whitlocks. A widowed woman, bound for Arkansas, disappeared without trace. Some pointed to the treacherous woods, others to bandits along the road. But Josephine knew better. Each missing traveler weighed heavy on her heart. She remembered their faces, their laughter at the table, and their trust. She would watch Clara's cold efficiency, the way her sister carried heavy sacks to the cellar late at night, the way the ledger grew thick with names, and feel her stomach twist. The townsfolk, however, were used to disappearance. Life in the Ozarks was brutal. People vanished into mines, rivers, and forests without explanation. And so, though unease grew, suspicion rarely lingered long. The Whitlocks kept feeding the hungry, and hunger, after all, silences many questions. One night in late autumn, as the wind howled through the trees, a tall stranger knocked at the Whitlocks' door. His name was Daniel Harlan. His gaunt frame and tired eyes spoke of long travel, but his presence carried purpose, not mere weariness. He introduced himself politely, but there was an intensity beneath his calm words. Daniel explained that he sought his brother, a man who had left home months earlier, traveling west through the Ozarks. He had not returned, nor sent word. Daniel followed every lead until it brought him here, to this quiet boarding house in the hills. Clara stiffened at the mention of a missing man, but Josephine, ever gentle, welcomed Daniel in with a bowl of stew. As he lifted the spoon to his lips, his brow furrowed. "This flavor," he whispered. A memory stirred, his brother's laughter at the family table, his fondness for venison stew. Daniel's gut tightened. Something about the taste felt too familiar, too personal, and Josephine's trembling hands only deepened his suspicion. Daniel stayed the night, listening carefully. Clara avoided his gaze, her sharp eyes watching him like a hawk. Josephine, on the other hand, seemed almost fragile in his presence, her guilt bleeding through every gesture. As Daniel sat by the fire, he studied the stew again. The flavor was rich, yes, but haunting. It carried a weight that food should not carry. He remembered his brother's strong laugh, his stories of adventure, and he felt a chill crawl over him. That night, when the boarding house grew quiet, Josephine found Daniel staring out the window. She spoke softly, her voice nearly breaking. "Some secrets," she said, "cannot stay buried." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and though she spoke no more, Daniel understood. She wanted to confess. He felt his stomach twist. Whatever truth she carried, he feared it was darker than any storm outside. Josephine's words spilled in the stillness of night. Her voice shook as she told Daniel the truth. Years ago, when their father died and hunger nearly starved them, a drifter froze to death outside their cabin. Clara, desperate and half mad with grief, carved meat from his body to keep them alive. "It was only once," Josephine sobbed, "only once to survive. But Clara, she said no one would miss the drifters, the forgotten men. She said we were doing God's work, feeding the living with the lost." Daniel's hands clenched. His brother had been lonely too. A traveler, a man without kin nearby. The thought hollowed him. Josephine begged him not to tell. "I never wanted this," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "But she's my sister. I couldn't leave her alone. What would you do if it were your blood?" Her plea hung heavy in the silence. Daniel felt his heart twist. The ledger of missing men haunted his thoughts, and yet Josephine's desperation pulled at his compassion. Could he condemn her? Could he forgive her? Josephine grasped his hand, her voice frantic. "Please, if the town finds out, they'll kill us both. I'm guilty only of silence, but silence is a sin too, isn't it?" He wanted to promise her safety, but Clara's shadow loomed large. That night, Daniel lay awake, torn between duty to his brother and pity for the woman who had confessed. He thought of the world's cruelty, how hunger and loneliness had turned two sisters into something unimaginable. But even as guilt gnawed at Josephine, Clara's iron will would not bend. The following morning, Clara confronted them both. Her voice was cold, her face carved with resolve. "I heard every word," she said. "You think we're monsters? We are survivors. The world forgets these men. We give them purpose. We save lives in our way." Her eyes blazed with conviction. "Judge us if you dare, but remember who you are without food, without shelter. Desperation makes saints and sinners alike." Josephine wept quietly, but Clara stood tall, unrepentant. Daniel realized then that Clara would never confess, never change. She believed herself righteous, and righteousness cloaked her sins like armor. And yet, he saw in Josephine's trembling eyes that she longed for absolution. Daniel began asking questions in town. Locals were wary. "The Whitlocks feed people," one old man muttered. "They kept us alive through harsh winters. Don't go stirring trouble." Others warned him the hills swallowed men who pried too deep. But Daniel could not silence his heart. His brother's memory haunted him. He walked the muddy roads, thinking of the stew's taste, of the ledger hidden in the Whitlock's home, of Josephine's tears. The town was torn between gratitude and suspicion. The stew had filled bellies, yet rumors grew louder. Some whispered of ghosts, others of curses. None dared accuse outright. Still, Daniel felt the truth pressing in. It was only a matter of time before it spilled out for all to see. Late one evening, while Clara and Josephine tended to their guests, Daniel searched his rented room at the boarding house. Something gnawed at his instincts, a need for proof. He pried up a loose floorboard near the hearth and found what his heart already feared, a blood-stained ledger bound in leather. The pages bore Clara's meticulous handwriting. Names filled the margins: drifters, loggers, widows, farmhands, always with notes beside them. Quiet man, no kin, easy to forget. Daniel's hands trembled as he turned the pages. Near the middle of the book, his breath caught. His brother's name: Thomas Harlan. Beneath it, Clara had written, "Kind eyes, spoke gently, no one will come." Daniel dropped the book as though it burned. His brother's fate was no longer a suspicion. It was carved in ink. Grief surged, tangled with rage. Clara had taken the one person who mattered most, and Josephine had remained silent. Daniel sat awake until dawn, staring at the journal. His heart was torn between two truths. Clara was a murderer, unrepentant and resolute. But Josephine was trapped, bound by loyalty and guilt. She had not killed, but she had not stopped it either. Justice burned inside him, yet compassion lingered too. What would justice mean in a land where hunger made beasts of the kindest souls? Would exposing the sisters truly serve the dead, or simply destroy the living? He thought of his brother's locket, which Thomas had always worn. If he could find it, perhaps it would bring closure. But even more, Daniel longed for a way to honor the man's memory without feeding the cycle of cruelty. As the sun broke over the Ozarks, Daniel made his choice. He would reveal the truth to the sheriff. Let the town decide. When Daniel presented the ledger to the sheriff, silence fell across the wooden office. The sheriff's weathered face tightened. He had known hunger too, but never this. A town meeting was called in the church hall. Farmers, mothers, loggers, and drifters gathered, the air thick with unease. Daniel spoke plainly. "My brother's name is in this book, along with dozens of others. You've wondered why people disappear. This is why." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some cried out in anger, others muttered doubts. "The Whitlocks fed us when we had nothing," one man shouted. "Without them, half this town would have starved." Voices clashed, gratitude against horror, loyalty against justice. The town was split in two. Were the sisters demons or survivors in a merciless world? At last, the sheriff declared the sisters would face judgment. They were brought before the people, one weeping, the other defiant. Josephine collapsed in tears before the crowd. Her words tumbled out, raw and desperate. "We were children when hunger nearly killed us. Clara saved us, but at a terrible cost. I begged her to stop. I begged her to find another way. But she was stronger than me, and I was too weak to leave." Her voice cracked. "I am guilty of silence, yes, but never of blood. Please do not let my sister's sins drown me too." Some in the crowd softened. Mothers who had lost children to hunger nodded through tears. They understood desperation. Others spat at her, calling her a coward. Josephine clutched her hands together, whispering prayers between sobs. She did not ask to be free, only to be seen as human. Clara, by contrast, stood tall, unbroken. "Do not weep for me," she declared, her voice sharp as a blade. "I did what needed to be done. While you hid in your cabins, starving, I fed you. Some of you sit here alive because of me. Do not pretend you would have done differently." Her gaze swept the room, meeting each set of eyes without flinching. "The world discards the weak, the forgotten. I gave them purpose. I turned their deaths into life for the living." The hall shuddered with divided cries, some in fury, some in uneasy agreement. Clara did not ask for forgiveness. She demanded acknowledgement. Her defiance struck fear and awe alike. She was no longer a sister, nor even a woman, but a figure of survival carved in stone. The sheriff listened as the crowd erupted into arguments, then silenced them with a single shout. "Justice," he declared, "must be done." Clara Whitlock was found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang at dawn. For Josephine, mercy was granted. Her punishment would not be death, but banishment. She was to leave the town forever, never to return. The verdict split the room. Some cried out that Josephine should hang beside her sister. Others whispered that exile was punishment enough for a woman so broken. Clara accepted her sentence with grim pride. "The rope will not shame me," she said coldly. "I leave this world as I lived, unbent." Josephine collapsed in sobs, clutching her sister's arm for the last time. Clara did not embrace her. After Clara's execution, Daniel sought out Josephine. She sat alone at the edge of town, a bundle of belongings at her feet, her eyes hollow. "I never wanted this," she whispered. From her pocket, she drew a small silver locket and pressed it into Daniel's hand. "It was your brother's. I begged her not to take him. He was kind to me. He reminded me of the life we lost before hunger twisted us." Daniel closed his fingers around the locket, his chest heavy. Grief pressed against his ribs, yet a strange compassion stirred in him. Josephine was not innocent, but she was not beyond pity either. As she walked toward exile, Daniel watched with a mixture of sorrow and weary forgiveness. His brother was gone, but perhaps, in this moment, some piece of him was returned. The town tried to return to life, but unease lingered. Some swore they still smelled the stew in the air, others claimed the hills. Themselves whispered the sisters' names. Daniel reflected often. He had come seeking vengeance, but what he found was a story of survival so desperate it blurred the line between villain and victim. His brother had been taken, yes, but so too had the sisters' innocence long before. The true horror, Daniel realized, was not simply the cannibalism, but the hunger that birthed it. A world that left two young women starving had created its own monsters. Justice had been done, yet the sorrow would remain forever. The boarding house stood empty, windows dark, its chimney cold. Travelers avoided the road for years, unwilling to pass the cursed place. But the Whitlock story lived on in whispers. Some said Clara's ghost lingered in the kitchen, stirring phantom stew. Others claimed Josephine found a new life far away, where she baked bread for the poor and fed the hungry with kindness instead of flesh. The ledger vanished, though some believed Daniel burned it in secret, unwilling to let the world remember his brother only as meat in a stew. The story became legend, half truth and half warning, told to children by firelight. Beware the dangers of hunger, for it can twist even the gentlest soul. One quiet evening, Daniel climbed a ridge above the Ozarks. He carried his brother's locket, polished clean, the last piece of Thomas left in the world. Beneath a great oak tree, he dug into the earth and buried it gently, whispering a prayer. He prayed not only for Thomas, but for Josephine, for Clara, and for every soul lost to hunger and cruelty. As the wind rustled through the leaves, Daniel realized the story was not only about death, it was about what desperation does when compassion is absent. The Whitlock sisters were not born monsters. They were shaped by a world that turned its back. In the silence of the hills, Daniel's reflection grew clear. The true lesson was not about fear of the stew, but about mercy. For when we abandon the vulnerable, we create our own horrors. And mercy, not judgment, is what keeps us human.